Hello, bonjour, ciao, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name's Tolu and I am a first year medical student at the University of Oxford. And this video is just a continuation of the series that I like to call medicine and makeup. So I am focusing on personal statements. So before I get going, I'm going to put my contacts on because I don't like doing like loads of makeup with my glasses on, so we are ready to get going. But I just wanted to put out that in this video, unlike my others, I'm not going to continuously pause all the time to say what products I'm using. I'm just going to leave them all in the description box below just so I can have a little bit more focus on personal statements, because I feel like personal statements are such an important part of your application because it allows you to really express who you are essentially, and it's important that you know the right steps to ensure that those 4,000 characters are filled with the best quality bits of information that you've done with your medicine experience so far. So as per usual, I've got my mirror in that direction just so in case I don't face the camera you kind of know why. Like, I just want to be able to see what I'm doing because the viewfinder's not always the best to sort of look through. But just to start off officially, the personal statement, like, I mean, the name is quite self-explanatory, but it's a statement about your own personal experiences and your own personal life. I know that's kind of silly to like say as an explanation, but you are limited to 4,000 characters, like I've said before, to talk about why you think, whether or not you feel like you'd be a worthy enough candidate to apply for that degree. When it comes to writing personal statements, medicine has some kind of specific criteria that need to be met, because going into this degree requires a set of particular characteristics, and those characteristics need to be observed as you write your personal statement. So I'm just going to give you a few pointers and a few tips throughout this video that you could potentially include in your own personal statements, because writing a medicine personal statement compared to other subjects is quite niche, it's quite specific, so it's important to note what things you should include and what you shouldn't include. And I'm also going to refer to potential differences that you need depending on the universities that you're applying to as well, because universities like Oxford, they have even more specific criteria that need to be met. So the first thing that I want to advise you guys to do is, with medicine, you're expected to do a lot of work experience, voluntary work, do a lot of research, read books, and I know right now in this current climate it's difficult to be able to do that work experience because we're all under lockdown and everything, but I've made a previous video talking about things that you could do instead. But as you are doing these things, I think it's important to make a note of it all as well, because when you're going about this journey, there are so many things that you could have done within your time that you may not necessarily remember as you're writing your personal statement. So I think it's really key to be able to list it all down so that you have a reference point when you were to start planning or actually writing down your personal statement. And I think once you have written all of those things down, it allows you to sort of visually see the things that you've done, or potentially allow you to figure out what things you could then also do. So if you're only limited to, let's say, one book, for example, that could always leave you more room to read more books to allow you to develop your interest within the field. So it just allows you to be able to see exactly what you've done. But I think one thing that's important to note is that if things aren't in abundance, that's honestly fine, because tutors are aware of restrictions in availability or like access to certain things. So even if your list is like a few pages long, that's fine. If it's not a few pages long, that's also equally fine, because the next point that I want to raise is, once you've written down this list, please write down things that you've learned from all of those experiences. Reflection is key when it comes to writing a personal statement, because there's no need to brag about all the things that you've done, because at the end of the day, people will have doctors as parents, or they'll have peers who do things within the healthcare setting, but some people may not. So next to the things that you've written down, write down what you've learned, what exactly you did, how could the things that you've seen within those experiences be applied to your own life as a future doctor, essentially. So talk about what you observed, how it made you feel, how it would apply to you in the future, how you think this particular thing is important, because reflection and evaluating is like, evaluating is a big one. Reflecting and evaluating on the things you've done shows how willing you are to learn and sort of adapt to particular changes and things, and that's so important as a doctor because things are always constantly changing and you always need to learn from previous things that you've done. So through evaluating and reflecting on the experiences that you've done, you're showing that you're basically on your way to becoming a potentially good doctor. I think another reason why evaluating all of these aspects is important is because we have particular guidelines that we need to abide by when we are a doctor, and as well as being on our way to becoming a doctor, and these are called the GMC guidelines. And you can look these guidelines up online, they're readily available, and you can see what sort of characteristics that they expect doctors to possess, what actions they expect doctors to do within their lives. So it's really important to make it known that you know some of these guidelines as well. So look up the guidelines, make a list of those too, and maybe as you're reflecting and evaluating on the things that you've done, relate it back to the GMC guidelines. When you were on your work experience, what did this doctor do that showed that they were meeting the criteria? Or when you read this book, what emotions and feelings did you feel that would allow people within the GMC to show that you understand like the things that were going on as well? So definitely touch upon that, because you can then use it to your advantage when you start writing your personal statement. In my own personal statement, I spoke in detail about the things that I saw when I did work experience in my local hospital in the radiology department. So there was one instance where I got the chance to observe things being done in a catheterization lab, and within there we had a radiologist, you had a doctor, you had a nurse, you had all sorts of people working together all to achieve the same common goal. And through me being able to observe these things, I was able to emphasize and focus on the idea of teamwork. So I referred to this concept, and being able to work in a team is a very important quality when it comes to being a doctor. So through me writing this down explicitly in my personal statement, I could show that I understood what the role would entail. And that's something that you should also try and look out for in your own personal statement. So talking specifically about the things that people want to see in their doctors, or the GMC want to see with the doctors that they register. I think one thing that's also very important when you're writing this list down is try and figure out which things that you've done connect. So essentially connect the dots. If there is a form of work experience that you've done that you could essentially compare to a book that you've read, do so. Show the connections between the two, because this will help you a lot, like a lot, when it comes to starting to write your personal statement. And it's something that I personally did for myself. In my personal statement, I did some laboratory work in the field of neuroscience, because if you're like a follower of this channel, you'll know that I'm obsessed with brains and I want to be a neurologist in the future. But I did some lab work in regards to brain, so I got access to see people like studying the brain on a molecular level and a cellular level. And I also read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks, which is a very cliche book, but because it was on the subject of something that I was really interested in, I continued to read it anyway. And then I did a bit of further research on brains and its plasticity. So essentially I had 3 things all to do with the brain that I could talk about in my personal statement. So in my head it would make sense to potentially feature all of these aspects in the same paragraph, and then it would show that I started with one thing, then I did something else, and I did something else after that thing, because continuation and flow is a really also important aspect of writing a personal statement. I think one thing that's very important to make reference to as you write your personal statement and as you reflect on the things that you've done is that you are aware that medicine isn't always as glamorous as it's perceived on TV. I, for one, am obsessed with Grey's Anatomy. I have seen all 16 seasons of that show and I love it. But that show is not realistic at all. So a lot of people may have wanted to become a doctor because they had watched shows like Grey's Anatomy, House, ER, Casualty, etc. But the content of those shows are made for entertainment purposes rather than realistic purposes. So it's important to be aware that the things that you see on the screen aren't necessarily going to reflect in real life. Being a doctor is not always very glitz and glam, because you are essentially playing an important role in the well-being of other people. So people will come to you with concerns they have about their health, with issues that they want resolved, and unfortunately you will also be exposed to potentially really upsetting things, which isn't always shown on TV shows and in films, but it's really important that you're aware of these circumstances. So when you are reflecting on your personal statement, make it known that you're aware that the field of medicine isn't always particularly glitz and glam, because it isn't, and that's the sad truth. But if those shows were what encouraged you to want to pursue the degree, make it clear that you've also done more research and looked into other things to show you a more realistic insight into the profession and in the degree. The next thing you can now do is plan a form of structure in relation to the things that you've done now. So connecting the dots will help you plan the structure a lot more easily, because when you found comparisons with these things, you can sort of link them together when you make a plan for what you want your personal statement to look like. So my personal statement, the structure, like with a lot of just general essays and stuff, was an introduction, a couple of paragraphs in my main body, and a conclusion. If you want to do that as well, perfectly fine, but if you don't, you don't have to. Like, there are many ways in which you could do things to make it work. Like, I know, for example, some people, instead of talking about a range of different things that they've done, they focused on like 1 or 2 elements, and it worked in their favor. So just find something that works for you and then develop it from there, because your personal statement is there to help you stand out. So it will be really cool to see if you can also incorporate things that could help you. So with your main bodies, try and include sort of an approximate layout of how you want to discuss all of the things together. And when it came to me writing my own personal statement, I focused on my main bodies first and then did my intro and conclusion last, because sometimes when it comes to like writing your main bodies, you can sort of spring an idea of what your overall concept should be, and then again will help. Oxford and Cambridge really like what is called a super curricula. So the bulk of my main bodies were in reference to these super curriculars. So my main bodies focused more on the things that I had done that were in reference to medicine. So this is like all the stuff I've said before, so your work experience, volunteering, the books you've read, etc. And they have a lower emphasis for extracurriculars. So these are the things that aren't necessarily in relation to medicine, so like sports that you've done, side jobs that you've done, etc. So I only left like a little paragraph at the end of my personal statement in reference to that, because I wanted to really focus mainly on my super curriculars. The universities that you apply to will affect how you lay out your personal statements, so definitely look into what the universities are looking for, and that'll be available on pretty much all of their websites, so you can look into that for yourself and see the kind of things that they're expecting their future applicants to possess. There was so much more that I could have included in my personal statement, but you're restricted to 4,000 characters, so I literally didn't have any more room for it. So instead I asked my teacher, who was doing my reference, if she could potentially feature it in my reference, because alongside a personal statement, someone from your school or whatever background that you're from is expected to submit a reference for you. So I asked if certain aspects of my life could be included in that reference. So for example, my time as deputy head girl within my school, I could have spoken about it in abundance in my own personal statement, but I literally just didn't have the room for it, so I asked if my teacher could do it instead. So she referred to my time as deputy head girl in my school in that reference, which is really cool because it allowed me to have more room to speak about more medicine-y things in my personal statement. And from doing all of that, I was then able to sort of come up with a potential couple of phrases that I could use to link it all together, and that's how I came up with how I could sort of phrase my introduction and my conclusion. For your introduction and conclusion, you want to sort of figure out an overall theme that you've included in your main body, so that way you can introduce it in your introduction and then summarize it in your conclusion. So for me, a consistent theme was reflecting on what I thought a good doctor would be and what characteristics they would possess. So my introduction I used to basically introduce what I personally thought a good doctor would be, because in my main body I then went on to discuss the things that I saw good doctors actually possess, so that I could talk about it in a bit more detail. And then in my conclusion I spoke about how the things that I'd seen those doctors do and the experiences that I'd done, I showed how being a good doctor allowed them to really appreciate the human body and fulfill their roles as doctors. One thing I want to mention when it comes to writing your introduction is to please avoid cliches. like please avoid cliches, because there are particular phrases that I'm sure tutors are kind of sick of reading through and seeing all the time. And one notorious phrase is, for as long as I can remember, I have wanted to do this, or ever since I was young, I've wanted to do this. And even if that were to apply to you, don't use that exact phrasing, because it won't really work in your favor, because I'm sure a lot of tutors are really sick of seeing that particular sentence being overused like literally all the time. And it's not even just with medicine. Other subjects are notorious for having like particular cliche terms, so avoid them if possible. So I think that is essentially like the main bulky bits of tips I can give you for writing personal statements, but there are a few other things I could point out to you that is worth noting. So one thing in particular is that there are certain books that loads and loads of people read and loads of people reference within their personal statements, which is absolutely fine. I, for one, included quite a bait book. So depending on how you phrase it in your personal statement, it could be used to your advantage or it could negatively affect your personal statement, which leads me on to my next point. If you're going to bring up something in your personal statement, make sure it's something that you can speak about in confidence. Because if your personal statement were to be brought up in an interview, you kind of want to be able to discuss a particular topic in enough detail. My camera's about to die, but I'm just going to keep going through my makeup off camera, and then I'll come back and like add a few extra points and summarize it at the end. So I will catch you in a bit. One thing that's really important to sort of realise is not every university will read your personal statement, but it's still worth ensuring that you include the stuff that you want to include in case someone were to read your personal statement. Make sure that when you do write it, you have a good understanding of all the things that you put inside, so that if they were brought up in an interview, you can answer a question set by the tutor or whatever. And yeah, you can look into the university's websites to see if personal statements are factored into your application process, so you can look at it that way. But yeah, I'd say, especially for now, really do take the time to appreciate and write a good personal statement. If you guys have any more questions, please leave them in the description box below. Okay, so this is I guess the finished look, and I'm happy with it. I'm improving my makeup game. But yeah, I really hope that the tips that I've included in this video are helpful with you writing your personal statement. And if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to leave them in the description box below, and I'll try my best to answer them. I can't wait to continue this series off, because I have so many things I want to continue to discuss about medicine applications, including the BMAT, the UCAT, the interview itself, your grades, etc. So be sure to expect them on this channel, and I can't wait to like create that content. If there's anything specific that you want me to make a video on, again, hit me up in my social medias, write them in the comments below, and I will try and see what I can do with that. But from like all my previous videos, you would know that I try to match my look with my outfit, and obviously I'm wearing white, so as you can see, today's look was pink, and I'm actually really proud of this, because I'm not one to like try out looks like this, but it's actually worked better than I thought it would. So hopefully you like this look, and yeah, I'm happy with this. I hope you like this look as much as I do, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye. I think we're alone now. Doesn't seem to be anyone around.
Brilliant. Why are you pulling the camera off?
Because you're making me feel insecure.
Composing piece.
We want to watch. Just judge you.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Okay.
Focus, focus, focus. Focus on me.
Get it, girl. Yeah.
My camera's not focusing.
Get it, girl.
Like, yes.